Welcome to Hacking Your Leadership. I'm Chris.
And I'm Lorenzo.
And Lorenzo, welcome to episode 4 of our holiday series of 2021, where we're talking about some really impactful or important questions to ask of your leadership candidates for leadership roles. And over the last 3 episodes so far, we've had questions ranging from learning about your team and trusting your team, getting your team to trust you. On today's episode, the question that I want to talk about is one that can be kind of a double-edged sword depending on what your values are as a leader. And that question is something that I like to ask of leadership candidates personally. Whether or not I get the answer I'm looking for is kind of a gamble based on who I have in front of me that I'm talking to. But it's something that I love talking about if I'm ever interviewing for a leadership role, even if it doesn't go over well, because it's such a part of who I am and what my values are, that I think I wouldn't want to work for a company that judged me negatively for my answer to it. Okay. Mm-hmm. And the question is, what is the most important responsibility you've had as a leader? And I think this is interesting. So the first thing I want to do is ask you, what's your most important responsibility as a leader, Lorenzo?
Mm-hmm. Well, as a leader, I mean, it speaks to my one sentence definition, was that you're personally accountable for the development of others.
Yeah.
So at the end of the day, as a leader, are my people actually getting development? Are they becoming better than they were the day before? And am I helping them to achieve personal and professional goals?
Yeah, right. That's what it comes down to. Now, have you ever interviewed for a company where the answer to that would have been, can you get a load of this guy's answer? What, it had nothing to do with a P&L scorecard or a financial outcome or something along those lines.
Yeah, well, I think it's interesting because that's the... If I wasn't so solid in my belief and my stance in what leadership is, then that probably would throw a lot of people, off to the side of like, if I didn't say my responsibility is to the business or my responsibility is to, create profitability and maintain the strategies or the vision of the organization. Like I could see where an interviewer or somebody who was looking for something very specific may look at that and be like, oh, he's a softie, or he cares about his people, or it's all rainbows and unicorns and stuff like that, and never getting to the part around my complete drive and my belief that outcomes is the ultimate measurement of how good people are getting and how much development you're doing as a leader. Because by theory is if your people are getting better, they should become more effective, more efficient, and your business should be better because of it. But we never get to that point if somebody asking me that question or an organization only hears me talk about my dedication to developing people, to not understand that I believe that the responsibility to the business is absolutely important.
Right. So really, you're talking about the difference between the what and the how. And so at the end of the day, where does that mean your responsibility is? Is your responsibility on whatever the outcome is, or is your responsibility on making sure that you have the tools in place so that the how is there, and then trusting that the outcome will naturally be there? And whether or not you're interviewing a person who believes because it's definitely a sliding scale. So if I believe that the outcome is the most important thing, the double-edged sword there is that I might do things the wrong way in order to get that outcome. And I know people who have done that. I know people who've gotten caught up in the moment and believed that they were so live and die by whatever an outcome was that it led them to do things unethically or things they would not normally do if they hadn't felt the same pressure. Now, is that pressure put on them by external forces, by their bosses and their leaders in the organization, or themselves? Both, obviously. But that doesn't mean that you shouldn't. That doesn't mean that you have an excuse to do what you did if it was unethical, or if it was, kind of like the ends justify the means. I don't think that's true at all. The ends do not justify the means. And so if you believe that, then what you're essentially saying is that your responsibility is not necessarily to an outcome. Because if that's the case, then what you're saying basically is that's the only thing that matters. Everything else goes by the wayside. Now, if your responsibility is what you said, to grow and develop people, and to make sure that they have the tools they need to execute in a way that is in line with whatever the company values are, I don't think that means that you don't feel a sense of responsibility to an outcome. I just think it means that you understand that it is not the end-all be-all, that something else has to be there. And a lot of organizations actually don't believe that. They don't believe that's the case. They believe that no matter how much you want to try to put into something, no matter what you focus on when it comes to your people, if the outcomes aren't there, then none of that all matters. And are they right? I guess so. I guess so. You could say that you treat everybody great and you develop people, but the outcomes weren't there, so the company went out of business. So I guess they're right from that standpoint. But where they're wrong, I think, is that they think that it's a zero-sum game, that it won't naturally be there. And I think if I'm listening to a candidate apply for a leadership role, what I want to hear is how the two are intrinsically tied together. I want to hear how they believe that you cannot separate out the two. How they don't say, well, I don't care what the outcome is, I'm focusing on the people regardless. Like, yeah, okay, you can't not care what the outcome is, but I also don't want to hear, whatever it takes to get there, we're going to get there, Yeah, that doesn't sit right with me either. It is a symbiosis of the two, right? And so what I want to ask you is, have you had to interview a person before where you felt like they were too one-sided on that? They were too far to one side or the other, and that maybe, bringing up the other half of that was going to be a little bit more of a difficult situation for them. But before you answer that, I want to give it up to word for one of our sponsors. All right, Lorenzo, have you had a candidate before that you felt was too one-sided on kind of the dichotomy between where your responsibilities lie as a leader versus, the people piece versus the outcome piece? And how do you reconcile that or get to know whether a candidate is really capable of delivering both?
Yeah, it happens all the time. And I think a lot of times, especially in an interview process, both like internally and externally, because people have prepared for what they believe that you want to hear. Like that's just in human nature. You want to go in and have a good interview, so you want to be able to like tell people what they want to hear. And sometimes what gets lost is what the actual job is and like what the responsibilities of the job are. And yes, our approach and our opinion and how we look at the work, that absolutely matters, but we cannot lose what the actual job is that we're responsible for. And you should be discussing the things that are most relevant to that job. So in our earlier example, we talked about like if I was going to interview for the sales manager job at a car dealership, and somebody says to me, Lorenzo, you want to be the sales manager here at the car dealership, what's the most important responsibility you have as a leader at this car dealership as the sales manager that I'm interviewing for? The first words out of my mouth should be to sell more cars, right? Like right. I am the sales manager responsible for growing this business and selling more cars. But to your point, it then becomes like to sell more cars through making sure that our employees that are selling cars are the most capable, they're the most educated, and they're fully focused on creating loyalty by taking care of our customers in a way that shows them that we care about them and that they should always buy their future cars at our dealership, right? But I got to start with what's the job that I'm actually interviewing for. The sales manager of a car dealership, my responsibility is to make sure that we are selling more cars. But to your point, explaining kind of the what's, how's, and whys of things matters a lot in that context. But I think that's where I've seen interviews that kind of go sideways is when somebody starts with something that doesn't have anything to do with the actual job they're applying for. And then it becomes then let me dig a little bit deeper and let's talk a little bit about this. So in doing that work, what are the outcomes that you would measure? What are the things that you feel are the best way for us to understand that you're doing that work successfully? So it's kind of like as the interviewer, you have the responsibility to also pivot a little bit and to dig a little bit deeper to allow there's some space to kind of connect some of those dots, because sometimes people get nervous. Sometimes, again, they've practiced what they want to say versus listening to what's being asked. These things happen, so you want to give people a fair shot and a fair chance to be able to really kind of put together their entire feelings on the job and the work at hand.
But is there a way that you can figure out whether or not it's just spouting or if they actually have the capability of doing this? Because that's really what it comes down to. I can say that I think that the way to sell more cars or whatever the outcome is by focusing on my people and making sure they have the tools they need and make sure they have the support that they need, and that my job is to encourage and develop them if they want to be leaders. I can say all the right things, but in practice, I know people who have said those things in an interview, and if you watch them lead, it is through none of that. It's through command and control, and you need to, shape up or ship out. And if that's what you want, if that's what your company wants out of you, then fine. Then it's up to the individual people working for you to kind of figure out whether or not your company aligns with their values. But if you say this thing that we're talking about and the company goes, yeah, this resonates with us. Yeah. Does it really resonate? Right. And if it does, how do you validate that it's actually going to happen? What do you want to hear from people to where you can think, okay, this person means what they say. They're not just trying to like tell me what I want to hear.
Yeah. I ask for more context. I'll say, that sounds amazing. Like, give me an example of how you've been able to do that successfully. Like, specifically, who have you worked with and how did you go about doing that? Because now the details matter. Right, the names, the numbers, the approach, the specific examples and stories. Watching somebody tell a story that they're proud of, they'll sit up a little bit taller in their chair. Right, like they'll look to you and they'll tell you with great specifics exactly how they did that work, how they approached it, what they thought of, what they were most proud of in that work. If it's another kind of vague glossing over of an example, let me think about that. About 9 months ago, I had an employee that I sat in. It's like these are all tells in whether or not somebody's actually doing the work that they just explained to you as you dig for more details.
Right. Is it a hypothetical in their own head they just made up that could have plausibly happened? Or are they talking about it with the specificity of a person who not only went through it, but looks at it as almost like a watershed moment in their leadership career, something that they, as you put, that they're proud enough of, where they're almost happy they were asked about it because it's something that they pride themselves in their ability to do.
Absolutely. And with that, it brings us to the end of this episode. This is Hacking Your Leadership. I'm Lorenzo.
And I'm Chris.
And have a great day.